amazing. We're 3 generations of fans celebrating 58 years of memories of Dark Shadows and the 100th anniversary of the birth of Jonathan Frid with 3 of his co-stars. First question is, what was your first impression of Jonathan? And let's start with you, Sharon, since you joined the show the earliest.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. This is a joy to see all these smiling faces that love Dark Shadows as much as we do after all these decades. It makes me feel really old when I say that, but that's the truth.
But you are perpetually 9 years old, as Sarah
in some
Collins.
of those minds, yes. My first impression of Jonathan, now you have to remember I was barely 10 years old when I first met Jonathan, and he was in street clothes when I met him. So he wasn't ominous or scary to me. He was not in character. He was just Jonathan. And I remember him being kind of larger than life, even though he was sitting in a chair. He was sitting in a folding chair and he had his legs crossed, and he was very casual. And I just remember him being bigger than life, and he had big hands. Again, I was a little girl, but he had big hands, and that always made an impression on me. And as far as his general demeanor towards me was, he treated me like a fellow actor. He didn't treat me like some little kid that didn't need to be in his way. We were all there to do a job, and he felt the same way about me. I was there to do a job and do it good, and everything's fine.
Fabulous. Marie, you joined the show just about this time of year in 1968, initially as Eve. What was your first impression of Jonathan?
Well, of course, the first thing was looking at him, and he had those high cheekbones, and then immediately this went in, and it was so interesting, his face, and then that voice, the voice I shall never forget, because he had just a magnificent, mellifluous voice, and it was so expressive, and also he was so nice. And the first day, you know, you go on to a soap opera, or any show, and it's been running for a while, and everybody knows each other, and all of a sudden you come in like the long-lost cousin from somewhere else, and you feel very out of place. But he and Dr. Hoffman, Grayson, were just so kind to me, and so inviting and welcoming, especially we went back to Grayson, and she would say, please, we have all this coffee over here, and pastries and bagels, we have that every day, so please help yourself to anything you want, and eat as much as you want. And I like that. Anyway, it was just a very nice, welcoming first day.
And Donna, you joined in summer of 70 as Roxanne, a character who went through, we'll say, many iterations over your 6 or 7 months of the show. What was your first impression of Jonathan?
Well, when I started, I was hired, I totally still believe, because everybody else was out doing the movie. And they had to keep the bread and butter going, which was the daily show. So I came in, and in general, everyone was exhausted from shooting. I mean, and I walked in, it was my first big job, and I was a stage actor, and it was fascinating, because I thought, what in God's name have I gotten myself into? And who are these people? And truly, everyone was exhausted. The thing that I think all of us are saying about Jonathan, and it's absolutely true, we all were struck by his kindness. Now, of course he was handsome. Of course he had that voice that we all remember. But his kindness was unbelievable. So I work through a theater company now, and I'm the older person, and I deal with a lot of young people. And I still hear him in my head with that gentle kindness. Wonderful, fabulous man.
You came onto the show at he had been there for 3 years. He was the lead of the show for 3 years. He had just finished a movie shot, actually, right here in this town, Tarrytown. Did he act like the star of the show?
No, he acted like the thing I have come to remember him as, the linchpin of the show. Everything revolved around him. If you thought your storyline was great, wonderful, but it was because of Jonathan and what he was doing. If you were given a fabulous death scene, which is great fun,
Which you got.
which I got, it was because of Jonathan. It was, the story revolved around him, and it was, we were ever so fortunate to be a part of this big wagon wheel that was Dark Shadows, but Jonathan was the center of it.
Yeah, well, I would say also that he was like the best of the actors on Broadway. So, for instance, I worked with Roderick Preston, and the first day he said, "Listen, guys, I am just another actor in this play. I'm not the star, I'm not anything, but just one of you. So I want you all to understand that." Now, Jonathan never said that, but he implied that.
Yes.
You know, so that you were very comfortable immediately. It wasn't like, big star, great Shakespearean actor, beautiful voice. No, he was just, we're all part of one little thing. And it was, that made it wonderful, and it made a family of all of us.
And so, Maria, you mentioned your stage experience, which was extensive, 5 Broadway shows, including Gypsy and Sweet Charity. Do you think that your theatrical experience helped you on Dark Shadows?
Oh my God, yes. I thought that anyone who was a theatrical actor, you know, a stage actor, really was better off than, except
Yes.
children. Children are so open and wonderful as Sharon was. But, not really. But, you know, otherwise, there's such theatricality in Dark Shadows. This was not you know, I never thought I would ever be on a soap opera, because I thought, I too am bigger than life, you know. And all of a sudden this came, and that was exactly what you had to have. If you didn't have it, you sort of melted into the scenery. But if you had that, you had everything that was right for Dark Shadows.
Yes.
So, Sharon, Jonathan played your brother on the show, but you have described his behavior towards you on the set as fatherly. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Sure, absolutely. I just want to put a little extension on what Marie said with regard to how everyone acted towards each other, each cast member. Marie said family, and it was like everybody who had theater experience brought that to the set. And because it was alive, it was taped live, that aspect of it was very important, because like theater, if something happens that goes off script or you just keep going, and that professionalism from stage acting, you know, was complementary to the show. That even though I didn't have that, I recognized that in the other actors. Anyway, to answer your question with regard to Jonathan, I didn't have a lot of interaction with Jonathan off-set, but when I did, he was fatherly, like you said, not in the kind of fatherly that was a disciplinarian, but more like if I was nervous or if I had been continuously messing up one particular line, you know how sometimes you just get that in your head where like that one word you just can't get it right or you keep dropping it. He alleviated that for me by saying things to me like, relax, it's okay. Even if you mess up, it's okay. Like the world's not going to fall apart. No one's going to beat you up over it. We mess up. He always
You
reminded
never
me.
messed up, Sharon.
I did. I messed up, honey, believe me.
Everything you did is perfect. We love it. Do we not love it, people? We love
He would remind me that everyone has their moment when they flub up a little bit, and it's okay. It's make pretend, and that calmed me.
Yeah, and Donna, you actually shared a story about Jonathan sort of sticking up for you or advocating for you. Can you tell the folks about that?
Yes, I hope he's not in attendance here. There was a director that was really unpleasant to me, but it took me ages to find out that this is what he did to every new person that came in.
Also the old persons.
Yeah, he was a bully. But I'm used to having a stage presence that goes with, I'm having a problem, I go to the director. This was not a guy I would go to. And he was just demeaning. He was terrible. And I thought, well, that's it. I'm going to be fired. First nice big job, down the drain. And Jonathan noticed it like within the first few weeks, and how kind. He called me to his dressing room one day, and I was mortified, because now I knew the star of the show didn't like me either. So he had me sit down, and as I mentioned to Will, I'm sorry to say this, but it's 1970, Jonathan had a mini fridge. I had never seen a mini fridge in a dressing room in my life. I thought it was fabulous. So I sat there awaiting my demise, and he said very kindly, just forget about what he says. Oh, no, I couldn't speak. No, forget about what he says. Oh, do the blocking, hit your mark, wait for your cue, but everything else, forget about it, you're fine. It changed my attitude for these last over 50 years. It's just like you gotta trust yourself. He came to my defense, and the next person that came on the show that he did it to was Virginia Vestoff, who I was so fortunate to have play my sister, and Virginia didn't take crap from anyone. So that ended very quickly. And then we had a nice lady director. Anyway, yeah, he was wonderful. He really
Leela
helped.
Swift, what was
What I did with, I was going to say, Donna, what I did with Henry is I just joked back at him, because he'd call us all Miss Thing. Oh, they do this and shoulder to shoulder, but he had a lot of good little things, like shoulder to shoulder is a wonderful direction on a TV show, because you never miss the person's face. But he had a tendency to insult people, everyone, not you. He did it to Jonathan, he did it to everybody.
Everybody.
But after a while, people just ignored him. And that was the best way to do it, you know.
I had to learn that lesson.
Yeah,
And
it was
this is again-
difficult, but
This is Henry Kaplan that
remember.
we're talking about, correct? You mentioned Leela Swift, groundbreaking woman director in television.
Yes.
One of the most significant figures, I think, on Dark Shadows behind the scenes. Any quick thoughts about Leela, like her technique in directing? Was she gentle? Was she different?
Well, what I liked about Leela is she was much more like a stage director, even though
Yes.
she basically did television. And Henry was a director on Broadway, but she gave you motivation, she gave you, we talked about a character, there was a feeling about what was going on. With Henry, he was definitely a traffic cop. You know,
Yeah.
walk to the red square, then move over here, look to the right, look to the left. All good technical things, but you didn't have any of the underlying things.
She was wonderful.
Yeah.
She did give you something to hang on to,
Yeah.
and that was very different. And she did not direct with a swizzle stick. I had nightmares about Henry's swizzle stick.
Tap you on the shoulder. Too.
You were shorter. He didn't do that.
I missed that, thank goodness. I'm swizzling back.
So, Sharon, you told me a story about Jonathan inviting you
to his place for a dramatic reading.
Which is basically what Mary and I did in the 80s when we were preparing his one-man shows. And some of the fans that we invited over to his apartment are in the room tonight. So can you talk about, was that weird to be at Barnabas Collins' apartment?
You know, at the time, I took it in stride. I took everything in stride because I was a little kid. I did what I was told. Go there, do this. I just followed direction. I was a good little girl. What can I say? Obviously, Jonathan spoke with my mother and invited us to come to his apartment in New York. I don't even know that she knew why we were going there. It was a get-together. I think it's probably the most that she assumed. And when we got there, there were maybe a dozen or more people there, and it wasn't a large apartment. I remember the room that we were in, living room area. People were on the sofa and the chairs and sitting cross-legged on the floor, kind of in a semicircle, and Jonathan was in a chair in the far end of the room. And the thing that made an impression on me as a small child was Jonathan's chair was elevated a little bit. And it gave the impression, and I don't mean this in a pompous way, but it gave the impression that he was kind of holding court.
That sounds familiar.
He was.
And everyone was obviously, you got invited to Jonathan's apartment. I mean, everyone there was rather enthralled. So all faces were up towards Jonathan, as well as mine and my mom's. But it wasn't until much later that I realized what a privilege it was to have been included. I was 10 years old. He could have just looked at me as fluff. You know, you have no impact on my life. But he didn't. He included me, and I think that was really kind of special.
That is special. So that experience with him outside the studio, Donna, you also shared that when you went on a promotional tour.
Oh, unforgettable.
So can you tell us about that a little bit?
We went to the auto show in Minneapolis, and God bless Catherine Lee. I said, I don't have anything to wear. And she said, I've got a jumpsuit. It's covered in little spangles. It'll fit you. And she sold it to me. I wore that jumpsuit on stage for years. Anyway, we got there, and I met up with Jonathan, and I see this big industrial hall full of cars. And Jonathan goes off to a corner, and there's a line of people. And they're ready for him. And who's sitting next to the next table is Tiny Tim. And the next table is the owner and handler of Arnold the Pig. I cannot imagine where I'm going to be in my spangles. And so they put me on the hood of a car that went around and around for hours. And I just was the queen, and until I thought I would vomit from the queen on this thing. And it was unbelievable. By the time they finally let me off, Jonathan still had a line around the block for his autograph, and then we had our dinner with Tiny Tim and Miss Vicky. There's nothing else you can say about that experience. It won't leave my head. But they, like Jonathan in your adventure, in his house, they were sitting up and we were on the floor on cushions. And it took me many years to like vegetarian food after what we were served there. Jonathan had such good humor and just nodded and smiled and said thank you, and then kind of whacked my arm and said, I think we should go. We all lived through that experience. God bless him.
So what you're saying is that you tiptoed through the tulips. Thank you. I'm a professional, people.
He's here every Saturday night.
So talking about the daily work at the studio, Marie
Dark Shadows had its own dedicated production studio. I know you've worked on other soaps. Was that different? Was that unusual?
Oh, it was so wonderful to have our own little house, really. You know, I worked in Somerset after that, and we worked out at a very huge studio, which had been a movie studio out in Brooklyn on Avenue M and 14th Street. And it was great, but Somerset was on one side, Another World was on this side. It was a 6-story house. There were dozens, hundreds of people always walking around. In our place, it was just us. So it was like we were coming to the mansion every day, or however many times we went there. And the one part I loved was when we were ready to go on and do the show, we had to go down a spiral staircase.
Yes.
You also could take the elevator, but we all chose to go down the spiral staircase because it got us in the mood, you know. And the part that was the best, because it was spooky and scary, but halfway down there was a sign, "Did you forget your fangs?" And that always made us laugh, you know, because somehow everyone eventually had fangs. And I was so sorry I didn't take my fangs with me because, you know, we were sent to a real dentist and he made fangs just like they made, you know, cats. And so they really fit beautifully, although you still couldn't talk with them. If you ever notice on camera, none of them were really talking with the fangs in. You'd say blah, 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 and then the camera would go on him, and you'd go in your pocket, and you'd get your fangs, and you'd put them in, and you'd say, but then the next part came where you went, I love that.
It's those long cutaways of the victim that always are the trigger that you know you're about to see something really good, like somebody getting bit. So you two were vampires. Sharon, you were not. How did you miss out on the vampire lottery?
I didn't get fangs, but I could come and go through walls.
Love it. What do you think is something that would surprise fans about the studio?
I don't know if anyone has seen the layout. It's on Facebook sometimes. People will post it in fan groups, the blueprint for the inside of the studio. And you've also seen some backstage photos of the studio. But what I don't think that you get the feel of, which obviously we did because we were there, the studio was long and narrow. And the sets were back to back to back on each side. So you had the Collinwood foyer next to the cemetery, next to whatever other location. In actuality, they were rather cramped and small. You know, the size of an average room, maybe less. But when you watch it on TV, it's a mansion.
It looks huge.
The way that it was constructed with such engineering thought or technique that made it look way more expansive than it actually was. And I find that fascinating as an adult. Obviously, at the time, I had no clue. I just thought it was funny that you could go from the cemetery to the living room or to the grand room. You know, as a child, I thought that was funny, and then I would go into the blue whale, you know. I have to share with you, as a child, this was one of my favorite memories. It doesn't have to do with other people necessarily, but just of my experience on the set. Obviously, you can conjure the blue whale in your mind, and usually there was almost like a bay window to one side, and you would see the soft waves reflective in the window. Well, truth be told, there was a gentleman on the other side of that wall that had a pan, like you would change your oil in or mix cement in, an aluminum pan on the other side with a mirror in it. Am I ruining things?
The illusion is broken. Everybody's going to ask for a refund, Sharon.
I'm sorry.
You ruined Dark Shadows for everyone.
I just fascinating because I'd never seen anything like this. There was a mirror in it, a plate glass mirror, and that's how he made the reflection in the window of the water. I just find that so cool.
And the next thing she's going to do is tell us that Jonathan was not a vampire in real life.
And you also have to remember that for the younger people that are here, the cameras that they used back then in the 60s were behemoths. The actual camera itself was, huge on stanchion that had, like a big metal circle around it with big wheels on the bottom and these huge,
Lots of cables.
and these huge cables. And then you had the boom, which was a piece of equipment that you had to climb up on that went up and over. I mean, huge, like mini tractor size. and it also had cables running from it, and they were half taped down all over the place. So, I mean, it was a challenge, no doubt.
So a lot of the folks who were with us here today from the original viewing audience of Dark Shadows were children, were kids. Donna, what do you think it was about Dark Shadows that appealed to younger viewers?
Oh, well, of course I didn't understand up front, but after all these years and different conventions that we've all been to, there was a time, it seems like we really haven't grown as a country some days, but everybody feels out of it, like they don't fit in. And there always is an age or a time in somebody's life, or in their looks, or in their mental capabilities that they know they don't fit in. Just put on Dark Shadows. Everybody fits in. Everybody.
Give it up for the misfits, everybody. All you misfits, clap for yourself.
Everybody. I mean, I got the job because I said that you don't have many people on that have red hair. Because the other two women who were in the final callback were gorgeous, blonde, long hair, dark, raven-haired woman, and me. I said, why should you be on the show? And I said, we just don't have that many people on television with red hair.
But that's exactly why they wanted you.
Yeah.
Or me.
Oh, no, absolutely. And
It was great.
Obviously, Dan Curtis went, yeah, she's got it. Because the other two women were excellent actresses, but, I have to say, years later, I did a couple gigs. That was Ryan's Hope at the same studio. I almost couldn't do it. It was such wonderful nostalgia. And the bottom line was when I was doing it, I sort of thought, what are you people doing here? This is our place. And that's how it always felt. When they tore the place down, I went the week before, and I just stood there with one of my kids. I just stood there and I went, this is the best place ever. Not the nightclub that they put in there, but this was the best studio ever.
Sacred ground. Marie, did you ever get noticed by fans on the street?
Oh my God, all the time. But the best one, and the craziest one, was when I was Crazy Jenny. And if you remember, any of you, the makeup I had, eyelashes on the top and the bottom, big lips, and always this baffled look on my face, and crazy, crazy hair. Everybody thought it was a wig, but it was really all this hair. A little more of it than I have now, but it was down here, and I just teased it with my handy brush. Anyway, when I walk in the street, I usually wear very little makeup. I might be going to the gym or shopping or whatever I'm doing. And so I was walking along 3rd Avenue one time, and some woman said to me, oh, you're Crazy Jenny from Dark Shadows. And I said, yes, but how did you recognize me? She said, you look just like you do on television.
We love that story. If you're a longtime Dark Shadows fan, that's like the greatest hits of Dark Shadows stories. So, Dark Shadows sadly came to an end in 1971, and there's an excellent podcast, by the way, called Terror at Collinwood, hosted by Penny Dreadful. Mayor is a guest on that. Listen to that episode, it would blow your mind. Literally, they're still finding out things about Dark Shadows 50 years after it ended. But Sharon, when did you first realize that Dark Shadows was, like many of its characters, had risen from the grave?
Amazingly, after I was through with my contract for Dark Shadows, and I did a few little things after that, I kind of went back to normal. I grew up in Philadelphia, and I wanted nothing more at my preteen, 12, 13 years old, to go back to the real world and be normal with my friends. Normal meant hanging out in the corner smoking. We won't talk about it. But the children, the other kids in the neighborhood would always kind of embarrass me by saying, you're that girl that's on TV. And I'd be, no, I'm not. And they're like, yes, you are. I'm like, no, I'm not. And I'd say, all right, I am. They'd say, no, you're not.
So then you just disappeared.
I knew that Dark Shadows had a presence then. But then I went on with my life. And I did other things, and I got married, and I had children, and Dark Shadows was so far in my past at that point, I didn't know this was going to happen. It was like another life for me. It wasn't until the early 80s that I was contacted by someone who is here in the audience. Her name is Marge, and she contacted me through snail mail, because that's what we had back then, in the old days. And she basically told me about a Dark Shadows fan group was gathering in New York City, and they would like for me to come. Well, I was a very cynical person, and I was working in insurance at the time, and Dark Shadows hadn't been mentioned for a very long time, and I thought this was a joke. I thought somebody from my past was pulling my leg. So I ignored it. And she contacted me again and gave me additional information that, for me, kind of legitimized it. But I was still a little shaky because I don't trust anybody. My Philliness, I guess. Long story short, I went to New York from Philadelphia, and I showed up at this restaurant, or wherever, I think it was a restaurant the first time. But anyway, and I saw all these people there. All these fans that genuinely cared about Dark Shadows and were all like hyped up. Jonathan was going to be there and everything, and I was like, wow, really? After all these years? This was in the 80s. And I came in, and someone said to me, all the cast members will be sitting at the table up front. And I said, okay. So I walked up front, and I was immediately stopped. And someone said to me, you can't sit there, that's only for the cast. And I went, I was Sarah Collins, I'm Sharon Smyth. Now you have to imagine, I was 20-something at this time, I had short reddish hair, I was...
And ghosts don't age, so they didn't...
Ghosts don't age, correct. I guess they were expecting a 10-year-old to walk in there. But this poor person was mortified, and she was like, I'm so sorry. I'm like, it's fine. I don't expect anybody to know who I am. Sight unseen after all these many years. But that was my first introduction back to the fact that there were fans of Dark Shadows all those years later. At least to me, it seemed that way.
And again, some of the 80s era fans are here, with us today. There were conventions, and there were fanzines, and there was stories, fan fiction written, and beautiful drawings, and
absolutely.
And it's interesting how the fandom has now evolved, and it's now things like podcasts and YouTube shows. But Dark Shadows always conquers new technology, which is amazing that it has endured to the extent that it did. Do you think that the renewed interest? I know that the renewed interest in Dark Shadows allowed us to launch Jonathan's one-man shows. But do you think that it helped you career-wise? Donna, let's start with you.
Oh, not at first. I couldn't get a job because nobody wanted to hire a vampire. It's very simple. You usually go from one soap opera to another one, and they were like, no honey. So my father, till the day he died, was very upset I said, I'm dyeing my hair brown. And what? I said, no, I'll keep the blue eyes, but I'm dyeing my hair brown. And then I got on As the World Turns, because it was, they just, you know, it was not the same character. They wanted if they wanted a sweet woman, which was at the time the things I was playing, not now, but that was the things I was playing, they didn't want somebody who bit people. It's just, it wasn't good on the resume.
And you were cadaverous when you were a scary, was she not a scary vampire? That was some seriously nightmare-inducing work there.
But to this day, our Bed Bath & Beyond near where I live closed recently, to this day, and now I know I'm much older. There will be somebody following me, and there was around the store going, "Excuse me, are you Roxanne?" And I have the same reaction that you did. I was, yeah. It's very interesting. It is something you can hold on to. Remember a childhood memory that makes you feel good or safe or okay or fun. And that's what we were. We were really the pop culture of the day. A lot of pop culture just goes away. But this is of a bunch of generations. Mothers are sharing it with their kids. Dads are going, I really kind of liked it. I felt like I didn't fit in. It's fascinating, and it goes on.
Love it. And Marie, you wrote an excellent book. Do you have the books with you?
On Stage and in Shadows. Yeah.
And will people be able to buy a copy afterwards?
Yes.
Great. So, guys, you know that a lot of sort of self-published memoirs are not stellar writing. Marie's is really good, and I highly recommend it. Very well written, economically written, and interesting. Marie, in addition to writing the book, you also were unique in that you got a chance to work with Jonathan again.
Oh, that was so
in
wonderful.
1993. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I was so involved in my career and getting started and keeping going and all of that. I never stayed afterwards or went out to the restaurants or any of those things. So I never really got to know anybody very well. But during the conventions, well, Donna and I met at the conventions. You and I never did any shows. So that to begin with, started our friendships. And then with Jonathan, because he did his one-man show, and I lived in New York and he lived in New York, I began to be a follower of his, and every show that he'd do, whether it was in a library or in his home, I would go to. And often I would host his parties afterwards. So we really got to know each other very well. And then I had the luck of doing a play with him down in Georgia. My friend, David Moore, who was the head of the drama department, invited me and Jonathan to do The Lion in Winter. And the fact is, I thought that Jonathan was going to be playing King Henry. But what it was that he was going to be directing it. And it was his first directorial assignment ever.
At nearly age 70.
And yet he studied, that's what he studied at Yale. But so we were the first and last to do that. And I truly got to know him so well because we lived in the mansion, a governor's mansion, because Milledgeville, Georgia, was the capital of Georgia during the Civil War. And so they had this wonderful mansion, and now it was a museum, but the top floor, they had part of it as the president of the Georgia College president, that was his office, and then the rest of it were apartments or rooms and for visiting dignitaries. And so we were that, and Jonathan had a bedroom there, and I had a bedroom there, and we shared the kitchen and the living room. So we had so much time in between rehearsals to just really get to know each other, go to dinner with David, do all of those things. And that's what cemented our relationship. And I was thrilled when I wrote the book, and we by then he was living in Canada, and we always spoke on the phone, and I told him about the book, and I sent him the preliminary before it was published, and he said, I'd love to write the preface for it. And he did. So I was very lucky to have him right at the beginning of my book. And so it became a wonderful, wonderful relationship.
Terrific. And what are you all up to now?
In the not too distant past, I did have the opportunity to work on a few independent films, working out of Bucks County and Philadelphia area, which was fun because I really liked the camaraderie of working on a set and working with young people, and they're so exuberant and creative and gets the blood flowing. The last few years of my life have been consumed with caretaking. My husband has medical issues, so I haven't been able to commit to doing anything. Aside from the fact that I was asked to do a couple things that were rather unsavory, and I think that would upset my fans. They wouldn't want to see little Sarah doing some of those things. So.
Although, when you get home, go to YouTube and look for, what is it called? On a Country Road. You will be floored by what you see Sharon do in this movie.
It was a great opportunity, and that was done in Portland, Maine, I believe. Yeah. So I'm not doing anything right now, but I was asked by Will if I still had been bitten by the bug or I still had the bug, and you know, I think that's in you. When given the opportunity, I rise to the occasion, and I love it. It's just that right now in my life, that's kind of on hold, just as it was for many, many years while I was raising my children. They were my priority, and now my husband is my priority. And I have to say, because I have an audience, that I just found out that my daughter, my 33-year-old daughter, is going to have a baby. She is 17 weeks in utero yesterday, so I'm thrilled to death. She's the size of a banana.
Terrific.
So I have a feeling that that's going to add to my caretaking role in the not too distant future. But you never know. I mean, there
So
are
if people
parts-
want to mail you baby clothes with London Bridge embroidered, send them to Sharon Smyth, courtesy of.
There are roles for little old ladies, though.
No, I
Donna?
don't those.
And Donna, how about what you're up to?
A lot of things. I wrote a great deal in the 80s and early 90s for the airline magazines. I enjoyed it. Recipes, stars, what's happening in New York. I really loved it. And I wrote I thought what started me was a great piece about going to that first convention that I went to, that I'm sure you all bought years ago. But that was wonderful. I'm editing a lot of books right now. I work with a woman who's written young adult books well, she's never met punctuation that she appreciates, so I am needed. But it's really trying to bring back to kids the necessity for kindness, for understanding, for having some guts when you're afraid of things. So I enjoy that a great deal. And Marie introduced me to a wonderful theater company that I do an amount of work through, American Renaissance Theater Company.
And wonderful work you've been doing, too.
Thanks, ma'am. But I wouldn't be there except for Marie. And so I'm working on a one-act. I love the idea of developing things with writers. Very interesting. Of course, it's tooth and nails. You have to say, could I take out the and? And then you wait about a week and a half, and they go, if you have to. But it's a wonderful experience of give and take.
and I just read for Hugh Jackman's next film.
Wow.
So as my
Send your positive energy to Donna.
as my agent said, and it's a crabby old woman, I did the audition in my pajamas, and the person who taped it was like, I've never seen you like this. But as our agent said, who doesn't want to just sit for an afternoon with Hugh Jackman? So
Thank you.
we'll see. We'll see.
Good luck. That sounds great. It's fun. Yeah.
So we are here, of course, celebrating the 100th anniversary of the birth of Jonathan. Marie, how will you remember Jonathan?
Well, I remember him from the times, not so much in the show, although I enjoyed him, all the work that he did and everything, but during that time, those later years until he went to Canada, of being his hostess in many of his parties, of going and listening and giving comments on his whatever new period piece that he was doing. One of my favorites was the one where, I've forgotten the name of it, where he introduces everyone, Aber Eben, this is Eva Abad, and Aber Eben, and I don't know how
In his
he...
one-man shows.
Well, if you really memorize it, that was the beauty of Regis Theater, because you could have the stuff behind. And you know, I did learn from him one thing. I started at the conventions to do Regis Theater, and I did one of The Vampire in His Closet. And it's a wonderful experience because you kind of know the whole script, you really do, but you really haven't committed it to memory, and you read it, but you know it so well that, you know, you're talking up this way to the ghost, and you're talking that way to the girl, and you're talking that way to somebody else, and it's really quite fascinating,
We
isn't
did
it?
a great thing for Halloween.
Oh, we did a wonderful thing. You all know probably Peter and John. Peter does, what's her name? Judy Garland. You know, a lot of you know her. For
Peter Mack.
Him. And 2 or 3 years ago, I guess
Yeah.
it was just before COVID, we did something, the Tale of the Horse, the Headless Horseman. Headless Horseman, and a couple of other things. And the two of us were on stage together. The only time that we'd ever been
That's
through all
it. That
those
was, we
years.
waited all these years.
It was so wonderful.
It was great. That was great fun.
And Donna, how will you remember Jonathan?
Well, I know it sounds a little weird, but I've been thinking about this. Certainly, kindness, 100%. But I think as you age, he never slumped. It takes 10 years off you if you sit like this. Good posture, good vocal quality. He always sounded like Jonathan. Marie and I don't sound like the old women we are. And that's, well, you just grew up a little. You'll have to deal with this later. But the bottom line is that I really think excellent posture, that kind of attitude, and keep your voice going, because the minute you get like this, they go, God, she's aged. And it's not attractive to anybody. And this way you can get up, look at yourself in the mirror in the morning and go, not bad.
Attitude.
So, final thought, Sharon, do you remember the last time you saw Jonathan in person?
I do. It was actually at the last convention that he was at. I don't remember exactly what year was that.
I think it was 2011.
2011. I was at the convention. I hadn't seen him up until this point when they had the dinner, and I was sitting 2 tables away from him, and I caught wind. I didn't want to bother him. I didn't want to go over there too often or whatever. A lot of people wanted to talk to him, and I knew that he was aging, and he wasn't 100%, so I didn't want pressure. But when I heard wind that he was going to be leaving a little bit early to, kind of beat the crowd to leave, I made the effort to go over there and reintroduce myself, having experience with older people that sometimes if you just come up on them and go, hey, how you doing? They go,
I didn't know who you were.
So I reintroduced myself, and I just said a few words to him and thanked him. And I gave half a hug, and he left. And, you know, it was important to me. He may not have meant anything to him, but it was important to me because it was the end of an era. I didn't know he was going to pass, obviously, but I knew that he was fast approaching that point. He wasn't completely himself, but, you know, he was kind of like a cranky old man at that point, but I find that sweet. So it was a good thing for me. It was a good thing to have that opportunity.
You know, he was a cranky old man in one way, but he always had such a wonderful sense of humor.
Yes, absolutely.
I remember once at one of the conventions, and he was getting older, and he started to walk up the steps with a cane, and he was very weak, and he had somebody else helping him, and he was doing like this, and then he got onto the stage, and he threw the cane up, and he started kicking his legs.
I remember
And, you know, we sat there thinking, oh God, the poor guy, what's happened? But nothing happened.
No.
He just was doing it for a laugh. And that's
Ever the
wonderful because
actor.
you don't think of him so much as this humorous, and he had a wonderful sense of humor. And but everybody thinks of him as the vampire and all of that, you know, the disturbed man and all that. But he also had that side of him, which was so pleasant and such fun when you would be in another kind of situation. So from that point of view, he was also, and I think also a wonderful friend. Because any friend that he had for life. Yeah.
As we can all attest. Sharon, the last thing you said as Sarah on the show to Barnabas was that you will always love him. We will always love Jonathan. Our thanks to Marie Wallace, Donna Wandrey, Sharon Smyth, and thank you guys for being here and supporting Dark Shadows, in some cases for your entire lives. Thank you so much, Mary. Let's bring Mary back up to the
Yes, and
stage.
thank you for all of us, for you being there all the time and looking out and seeing all these wonderful faces that we've known over the years, and occasionally a new face, which is also so wonderful. So thank you for coming. Mwah!
Yes,
We love
thank
you.
you.